Hello, everybody. It has been roughly 2 months since Fallout 76 launched, and I think now is actually the perfect time to give my thoughts and opinions on it. Why after 2 months? Well, for one, I don't necessarily have to deal with the launch issues that a lot of people had because the game has been updated several times since then. And all of people's opinions have kind of calmed down on it a bit. So I feel like it's safe enough to start talking about what Fallout 76 is and what it can become. But before we get started, I wanted to address a few of the issues that the game currently has that are things that will be fixed over time. And the first of these are the performance issues. Now, Bethesda games are no stranger to performance issues, and I would say any game within the past 12 years that they've released have suffered from massive performance issues at launch. For the most part, over time, they do iron a lot of that out, and they do fix a lot of it, because it is rather difficult to make an open world game and be able to keep performance intact. Some companies do it better than others, and a lot of that depends on the engine you're using, and with Bethesda, the engine that they do use, it has quite a few issues with it, as we've seen with Skyrim when it first launched, Fallout 4 when it launched, and now 76. And probably if they continue with this same engine, which it looks like they're going to for the foreseeable future, their future games will also have very similar issues. On top of this, you have all the bugs, but we'll talk about that in a moment. My point is that the game still has a lot of performance issues, and they have come out and addressed those. They've said that the next patch will come and fix a lot of the performance problems that people are having, but whether or not that will be wide-scale changes and people will suddenly see huge boosts in frame rate is yet to be seen. We'll see how that ends up going. The fact of the matter is, every Bethesda game that's released lately has had performance issues. They've gone back, they've tried to fix them, and for the most part, they do a pretty good job of that. However, there's still spots in Fallout 4 that your frame rate will tank despite having a good PC. And man, if you're playing on console, you know this more than anybody else. There's a lot of areas in those kind of games that just will perform poorly regardless because of all the props and stuff that they put in an area and just the busyness going on with it. I think Fallout 76 is going to be susceptible to this as well. I think the airport area is a place that I have seen massive frame rate drops on my beefy PC, and hopefully they manage to fix that and increase performance on the game without reducing any of the fidelity of the game, but we'll see if they end up doing that in due time. So outside of the performance issues, which I do believe will be for the most part fixed over time and hopefully sometime soon, you also have just the general bugs. Bethesda games are more than well known for their crazy bugs, and 76 is no exception to this as well. I think, again, you just kind of have to let them do their thing, let them address these bugs, especially because this is a game that they are going to support for quite a long time, or at least that they've promised to do so, and many of these bugs will be squashed over time. However, just because they work on fixing one bug doesn't mean that that's not going to address another one that comes up. So you may have one bug get squashed and 3 more in its place. That's the nature of game development. The reason I wanted to address these issues in the game is because they're big issues that people have with Fallout 76. You know, people say the game is, whatever they think about it, but it's got bad performance, or it has crazy bugs. Like at launch, a lot of people were suffering from the game just crashing to desktop, or on the console just completely crashing out entirely, and some of your progress not being saved. And that is a really frustrating experience as a player, but over time, hopefully Bethesda is able to address a lot of that, and they have since launch. I am coming in about 2 months later, and I'm not messing with any of the launch issues that a lot of people are had and that have now been addressed through a couple patches. So for me, my experience thus far has been much more positive than a lot of people when they first picked up the game. So now that that is out of the way, let's talk about the game and what it is. So premise-wise, Fallout 76 is obviously set within the Fallout universe, except it takes place 25 years after the nuclear war that starts in the Fallout series, which is way sooner than any of the other games that happen. As it stands, you come out of the Vault 76, on what is called Reclamation Day, which is a part of what Vault 76 was, which is to recolonize what would end up becoming the Wasteland. So you come out 25 years after the nukes land, and things, as you see them and as you find them, are much different than they are in further Fallout games because you're coming out way sooner. Things haven't really had a chance to change and adjust and alter based on the radiation, and the Wasteland as it stands has not really had a chance to settle down and become what we know the Wasteland to be in many of the areas, based on other Fallout games. It's also a persistent online multiplayer survival game, much like games such as Ark or Rust in recent times. Those are a couple big ones that you may know of, where you get thrown into the game and the objective is to basically go out, explore, find stuff, and survive as best you can. In Fallout 76, you have a food and a water meter. You're trying to make sure that you keep yourself fed and watered, but this is really just a side mechanic. It's not really a main mechanic of the game. It's something you don't necessarily contend with at most points, and instead you are basically playing an online version of one of the hardcore Fallout games. So there are survival modes in recent Fallout games, such as Fallout 4. I think that's the best example because it's the most recent one that they added in a patch where you kind of have to worry about your eating and your drink, and you have to worry about diseases. And they took a lot of those mechanics that are in that version of Fallout 4 and just put it into a multiplayer version. So you get the survival mechanics you would in a normal survival online game and put it with the Fallout skin. The result is a game that has not nearly as much narrative, story, or direction as a normal Fallout game, but instead replaces that with the multiplayer narrative, being able to interact with other players and being able to do some more of the survival aspect in a really massive map. I don't think that can be understated. The Fallout 76 map is the biggest map that they have put out in any of their games. It's crazy large, and there's a lot of stuff to do in it. There's a lot of stuff to find, but for the most part, it's just a giant park. There really isn't a lot of narrative stuff going on, and that's one of the other big criticisms about the game. You know, Bethesda releases large RPGs. You look at Skyrim or Fallout 4 or heck, even Fallout 3, and you see these games that have large narrative arcs and multiple side stories. You know, Oblivion and Skyrim both had things like the Dark Brotherhood quest lines that you could go do, and for the modern versions of Bethesda games, those storylines are pretty much embedded in people's heads as really awesome stuff that you can go do in these games, and Fallout is no exception to this. You know, Fallout 3, Fallout 4, Fallout New Vegas, there were things that you could go do as side missions, such as the Brotherhood of Steel quests and going and doing the Institute stuff within Fallout 4. These were all side stuff that you could go do. You could go talk to NPCs. There was a lot of story going on. In 76, you don't have that. There are some NPCs. Most of them are robots of some description where you can go and talk to them and they will generally talk back to you. You don't really get to talk to them at all. You don't really have any choices with them. They just kind of talk at you and give you quests, and there isn't a whole lot of RPG going on with that. You're not really gaining any, massive amounts of story from these characters. They're just kind of giving you exposition, and you kind of have to sit there and listen and then absorb what you want from that. On top of that, because there are no NPCs to talk to, the way that they deliver a lot of the story is through audio logs. So you're basically exploring little areas and you're finding these audio logs, and that's the story that you're getting, is what was left behind. And for people who really like Bethesda games, who really wanted a multiplayer Fallout 4 or a multiplayer Skyrim type game, they're not getting that here because it needs to sacrifice that part of the game in order to implement what they wanted to do with the large multiplayer component of it. And that sacrifice, I think, is at the detriment to the game in a lot of ways. But if you take it at face value and you go, okay, well, this is a game that isn't like the other games. It's a game instead of which I have to go and find the story as it's there and take the story for myself rather than kind of having these NPCs that I can go and interact with. You have to do a lot of the work for yourself. Then it's a very different kind of game at that point. And if you take it at that value and you realize, okay, I'm going to all of these little tiny towns and these little settlements, and I'm going to these like large ruins of cities, and I'm scouring through everything, and I'm not trying to rush, I'm not trying to like quickly level, I'm just trying to take in the world and what happened in the past 25 years while I was in the vault, then it turns into a game about exploring and trying to piece together puzzles and like what happened to everybody in the last 25 years after the bombs fell. And when you take it like that, it's actually way more enjoyable than having to worry about like what the overall like Fallout story is. But the problem with that is the players then, the fellow players then become a nuisance to that. It becomes a barrier to trying to absorb that. If this was a slow paced, you're listening to audio logs kind of game, then that is a very different kind of game than playing with multiple people. For instance, if you're playing with 3 or 4 of your friends and you're all going around and you're trying to explore and you're having fun with them and you find an audio log, you start listening to it, someone is bound to talk over it and completely ruin what you're trying to absorb in there. So it's counterproductive having the multiplayer aspect, in my opinion, to how they've set up the narrative. But this is simply just one of the myriad of issues that people have, is the fact that the game doesn't really have that much of a narrative. So if you try to jump into the narrative, it's best played solo. And if you try to play the multiplayer part of it, it's best played multiplayer. And that seems counterproductive and counterintuitive to how the game was designed to be played, which is to play it multiplayer with your friends and have some fun. And you kind of have to choose which one you're going to do. So if at the end of the day, that's actually not a bad thing, because if you're playing solo, you can just go absorb the world and have fun in that way and go and learn and do the little quests that they have. Like, they give you daily quests. We'll talk about that in a minute. And you can get that stuff done as you play by yourself. But if you go and play with friends, you're not going to get that same experience. You're going to have a harder time really getting into the audio logs and whatnot, if that is what you want to do, unless the other people you're playing with have agreed that you're going to be able to get into that stuff together. And something that muddies the water even further is, I believe you have 4 different kinds of Fallout players. You have the players who played the original 1 and 2, which were turn-based tactics games. They had the Fallout-ness to them. There were some silly things going on, but they were great games. But you have the people who played those and are loyal to those, and that's kind of the Fallout that they want. Then you have the people who came in for Fallout 3 and for Fallout New Vegas, and they are people who really enjoy that style of game. They really loved Fallout 3 and New Vegas, and obviously those games had their own set of issues, but for the most part, those players fell in love with those games. So those are 2 types of players. You have the original players, and then you have the new players with Fallout 3 and New Vegas. But then you also have what I consider the crossover between the 2, people who like both Fallout 1 and 2 and 3 and New Vegas and want to see just a game set within the Fallout universe because they're in love with that universe. So you've got the original people who, honestly, if that's the game you're looking for, the Fallout 1 and 2, you're better off going and playing games like Wasteland, which, Wasteland 2 is fantastic. But then you have the Fallout 3 and New Vegas people who want kind of the more modern type of Fallout game. And then you have the crossover people who just kind of want any kind of Fallout game. And then that leads us into the 4th player that I consider, which is the modern Fallout player. The player that jumped in with either Fallout 4 or 76, and they don't really have the history of the other games. So there's a lot of stuff that's new to them. And could you imagine a player, if you're one of the other players that I've mentioned, could you imagine one of these players jumping into Fallout for the first time and it's Fallout 76? That's not a good impression to have, because it's really hard to describe to that person what makes Fallout special, when what makes Fallout special is not within Fallout 76. A lot of that is missing. It feels kind of gutted. It feels like a structure of what used to be, rather than a tower of what stands as a good example of a Fallout game. Personally, I think Fallout 1 and 2 have their merits. I think those are great, really great games. I think 3 and New Vegas have a lot of their problems, and a lot of that comes down to gameplay problems for me. I think Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas had a lot of shooting issues. I couldn't stand the shooting in those games. And that's kind of what made V.A.T.S what it was in those games, is because the shooting was difficult and they wanted to add V.A.T.S from the previous games, but it's hard to do that if your game is a first-person shooter and not a turn-based tactics game. So that was the version of V.A.T.S that we got. And then we got Fallout 4, which I thought improved upon the gameplay way more than any previous Fallout game. I think that the shooting in Fallout 4 was great, but it had its own story issues and definitely some performance issues. And if you didn't like building settlements, that was totally not a thing that you would want to do in Fallout 4. So you kind of lost a big part of that game. So there were plenty of people who didn't like Fallout 4. I'm one of those people who thought it was pretty good. In fact, I've done a full playthrough on the channel. You can go check it out. I'll make sure I put a link in the description. It's an old series, just kind of keep that in mind. But for the most part, I did enjoy the game as I played it. It had its issues though. And then jumping into Fallout 76, I know what I'm getting myself into. I'm the kind of person who, yeah, you know what? I would really enjoy a multiplayer Fallout game set in a kind of survival-esque thing where you're doing what you're doing in Fallout 76. But for the most part, you know, if I feel like the game has been gutted, if I feel like a lot of what makes Fallout special is not there, and it's just kind of the structure of what makes Fallout special rather than the meat of it, then I'm not really going to enjoy the game being a Fallout game. I'm just going to enjoy it being a multiplayer survival game. And you know what? As a multiplayer survival game, Fallout 76 is pretty good. The shooting is way better than, you know, Fallout 3. It feels basically the same as Fallout 4, minus the V.A.T.S system is a little different because you can't really slow down time in a multiplayer game. That would slow down everybody's time, and that's a complicated thing when it comes down to netcode. And at the end of the day, it's basically just a auto aim system. So it's not quite the same as what it used to be. So, you know, take that out of the equation and just say, okay, it's a multiplayer survival game that happens to be set in a Fallout wasteland. So at that point, you're still getting like the Nuka-Cola stuff. You're still getting the crazy robots that are sometimes weird and sometimes silly and sometimes malfunctioning and want to kill you. And you're getting a bit of the narrative from Fallout in there, but nothing that really sets it apart as like, hey, this is a crazy storyline like the Brotherhood of Steel stuff. So you're just getting a survival game. And again, as a survival game, I feel like Fallout 76 is one of the better ones out there. One of my main issues with these kind of games, Rust being a good example, Ark being an even better example, is when you add other players into an ecosystem like this, the amount of people that want to troll other players just for the sake of messing with them and will immediately kill on sight no matter what is significantly high. And for me, that's not why I want to play those games. I feel like games like this are really cool when you can interact with another player and not have to worry immediately about you just getting killed. Sea of Thieves is another really good example of this, where in Sea of Thieves, I would love to go sailing past another player, hail them down, go to an island with them, go take out some skeleton boss and do like really cool things with them. But the problem is in Sea of Thieves, the majority of your interactions with other players are you're sailing past someone and they immediately start shooting at you because they want whatever's on your ship, even if you probably don't got nothing on your ship. That's the problem with me in these games, is I want meaningful interactions as players. I don't want a PvP game. And that's one of the things Fallout 76 does really, really well, is it tries to reduce the amount of trolling from other players that can happen. You're not going to find yourself, unless you're really wanting to roleplay it, you're not going to find yourself being imprisoned by another player eating your own poop as you can in Ark, because the game doesn't really allow for that kind of thing to happen in a way where if you are a high-level player, this is actually an example that I have run across. If you're a high-level player that comes across a low-level player, in my case, me, and you want to use your proximity chat to kind of screw with the other person and try to antagonize them, then you could totally do that. But if you go to shoot that player, that low-level player, they take massively reduced damage until they shoot back at you. So essentially, you can choose whether or not you participate in that kind of gameplay to a degree. Obviously, if the person keeps shooting at you for quite a while, because you do take really massively reduced damage. In this case, the guy that was doing this was like level 89 or something, that was running around next to me trying to antagonize me, which is not a pleasant experience, but I could just, mute the voice stuff if I really wanted to in that situation. And then he shot at me, and I didn't shoot back, and so he just kind of ran off. But when he shot at me with his crazy weapon at level 80, whatever he was, it only did like 1% of my health and damage. So in this case, if I shoot back, then his gun would do massive amounts of damage to me because he's a high-level character with really good gear. In my case, I'm a low-level character with bad gear, and I'm not going to do a whole heck of a lot to this guy. He probably has, a lot of health. So it does a good job of making sure that high-level players can't necessarily go around ruining the day of low-level characters. And on top of that, in survival games like this, you usually lose all of your stuff when you die, and you have to go back to your body and pick it up. Like Ark is another great example of this, and it makes it really inconvenient when you die. Well, in 76, that's not really the case, so you end up not really having a huge penalty for other players trolling you. It's more or less just an inconvenience than anything else. So to give you an idea of what to expect with this game if you haven't played it yet, basically you jump in, you make your character, you get out of the vault at a Vault 76, and you basically are following the logs of your vault overseer. And she has basically left all these logs behind to talk to whoever found these things, whoever took the initiative to try to find these things. And you learn a little bit about her and her story, and you're basically just listening to audio logs, and it kind of reminds me of games like Tacoma or Gone Home in a way where you're experiencing a story and a narrative as you go through this story without necessarily directly interacting with characters. And that's fine and that's cool, but again, if you have other players that are messing with that by talking over things, then that whole story is not going to be interesting to you. But as you go throughout the world, you're going to find side quests to do, and those things will give you loot and increase your gear and try to give you a little bit more story about what's going on. And each area has kind of got a little bit of environmental storytelling mixed with audio log storytelling. There's a lot of stuff going on. So you're kind of going from area to area, you're collecting gear, you're leveling up. As you level up, the perks work a lot different than different Fallout games, where you basically have these perk cards that you're equipping and leveling up and playing the character that you basically want to play. There isn't a whole lot of restrictions to how you play your character. You could run around and be a melee person, or you can try to get a sniper rifle or pistols or stuff like that. Like, there's a lot of options available to you as a person who's playing around. And eventually you get your camp, which you can place anywhere, basically. And when you log out of the game, it removes your camp from that world, and it's gone. It's nobody can come and mess with it. And then when you log back in, it puts your camp back down where you were as you log in, and you can then go to your camp and build stuff, kind of like in Fallout 4. It uses the same system as Fallout 4. So you can build up this base and put walls around it and defenses and have a ton of equipment stored there. And you have a stash that is shared throughout the world. So this one stash, you can go and open it and put all your stuff in it, and it's protected. But you can also, go throughout the world and find other stashes that are just like part of the environment, and it is your stash, so you can go in and store stuff, so you don't always have to go back to your base for it. And I think that's a cool system, especially in a game that is encouraging you to pick up scrap so you can be able to build things at your base. And the essential gameplay for most of the game is that you're going out and exploring, you're finding stuff, you're coming back, you're building up your base, and you're just leveling up your character, getting a little bit of story along the way, participating in events that randomly happen, and being able to quick travel from one place to another and just kind of jump around the map and do whatever you want to do to explore and have some fun. When it gets to the end game, there are these nuclear codes. You get these codes that you put together. Once you have them all, you can shoot a nuke at a place. And you could nuke someone's base, which seems rude, and it totally is, but anything in that area, any creatures in that area evolve and become high level. And it's basically the version of, it's like Fallout's version of a raid, where you get all these things high level, you go and kill it all, and you get crazy loot from it. And that is a really cool system. If a set of players are like being bandits to you and kind of being butt heads, you could nuke them if you're at that point in the game, if you really want to. But there really isn't anything that's setting you back, because if you're that far in the game and you're like, I don't want my base to be nuked, first of all, the people have to know where your base is at in order to do it, which can be kind of difficult in order to know, because again, the moment you leave the game, your base leaves with you. So you could easily just be like, oh, they're shooting a nuke. Okay, well, I'm out of here. And you can avoid a lot of that. But at the same time, if you do have players who want to engage in that kind of PvP, they can find each other's bases and figure out how to, blow each other up. But your base can be moved at any time as well. So you can like go and pack it up. It'll save everything. And you can go and place it down in a new area. And the things that can't be placed because it can't figure out how to do it on the terrain, it'll all store as a blueprint, and you can take it and put it down as you see fit and rearrange your base pretty much anywhere in the game. So there's some cool things there that are useful at stopping player trolling and stuff like that in the game. And for the most part, it removes a lot of the issues that I have with these survival games. The biggest issue of Fallout 76 at the moment is not any of the stuff that I've mentioned before. It is simply the fact that the game is new and does not have a solid set of end game activities yet. Once you complete the main kind of story of finding the Overseer stuff and then learning a little bit about all the side quests going on that you can go participate in optionally, once you've kind of explored everything and leveled up and done maybe a couple of the nuke codes, you don't really have a whole heck of a lot to do after that. And that's where the reliance on Bethesda comes in, because they have said that they're going to support this game for quite some time, which means that you kind of have to put a lot of faith in them adding new content to the game, new activities to the game. They've made some promises of what they're going to be adding, and one of the things sounds really cool, which is pretty soon here, they're going to be adding the ability for players to become vendors and vendor off stuff. And that sounds awesome. That's like adding those item shop games, which are really fun, where you like go into the dungeons, you find items, you sell them to NPCs and stuff like that. It's basically taking that idea and putting it into Fallout. I love that. I would totally be down for like making my own shop and vendoring off all these stuff to players that, want these high level items. I think that would be really cool, really fun. And I'm actually looking forward to that. But outside of that, they need to add more activities for players to do and to come back to. They need to give people reasons to come back and play this game, because the launch was rocky. And if you still own this game and you didn't refund it, then at this point, you're basically having to, sit around on your butt for several months until they add stuff into the game, especially if you've already completed essentially the current set of content. So they need to come up with something big that'll bring players back. But from my understanding, from what I've played so far, and I've played at weird times of night and then also during prime time during the day, I have seen quite a few players, and the game feels healthy because the worlds aren't, hundreds of players in a map. It's a handful of players in a single map, and each time you log in, you're going to go to different players. So I think it's really cool that they do that, because it makes the game feel alive, ironically, because you have less people, but it makes it seem like, there are people still playing this game, still enjoying this game, and it's a game that I feel like I want to come back to once they have a lot more content. At this point, I'm really enjoying 76. I'm enjoying exploring on my own. I think it would be really fun to bring in people and play with those people, but at this point, I'm having fun on my own, just going around and learning things about the Fallout world and about West Virginia and just like the area within the Fallout universe. But I want to know if you are enjoying the game, so definitely let me know in the comments what you guys think of Fallout 76. My impressions have been more positive because I've jumped in later after launch. I'm not having to deal with a lot of the launch issues. And as a gameplay-wise, the game is a lot of fun to me, and I'm enjoying it. And I'm looking forward to more of the game in the future. I just fear whether or not they're able to deliver on the promise of good content coming in the future. But at this point, anything's possible, because remember No Man's Sky? That game launched, it was awful. And after a year, and then even a little longer than that, you look at their most recent update, that game is now incredible, and I love going back to it. So I I would say I'm optimistic about 76, and I think it is a game worth jumping into if this is the kind of game that you like playing. And if you're looking forward to a new Fallout game, hold off, wait for a new Fallout game, because there eventually will be one. 76 isn't going to be the last game they ever make in the Fallout universe, and I'm sure the next game that comes around as a massive like Fallout installment will be what you're looking for. But in the meantime, 76 is a lot of fun to run around and shoot things in. With all of that being said, thank you for watching, and we shall see you guys next time.